Welcome to another Bandology interview. Bandology is a Canadian nonprofit dedicated to more music for more kids via education, collaboration, and community.
Hi everybody, my name is Sandy Wright and I am the Music and Education Coordinator at Bandology. Today you're watching one of our interviews and today we're going to be speaking with Pete Meechan. How you doing?
I'm good, how are you?
Good. It's very exciting to talk to you. We've met before and had a great conversation. So I'm very happy I get to ask you some questions and find out more about you. So tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
So I'm a composer full-time. So essentially my job is writing music to commission, which I've been very fortunate to do, I guess, as my full-time profession pretty much, I don't know, 15 plus years now, maybe 16, 17 really. And that's for a whole variety of instruments or ensembles or soloists. I get to do a whole variety of things. So that's an exciting way to be creative, but also I get to travel a lot to performances and go and meet lots of people and hear lots of musicians play all across the world. And so it's a really lucky and privileged life to be able to live.
That's awesome. What's your what kind of stuff do you generally write for? Do you have a thing that's your main focus when you're composing?
You mean in terms of instrumentation or
ensemble, something like that?
Yeah. So, I guess the majority of my writing is for wind orchestra, wind band, concert band, whatever people like to call it. I've written a lot for British style brass band. As you can tell, I'm British, but I live over in Canada, in Winnipeg. I've lived in Canada for 8 years, so gradually sort of moved away from more of the British style brass band and more of the wind orchestra ensembles, but also a lot of other things. So I quite enjoy, more than quite enjoy, I really enjoy writing chamber music. So write quite a bit of chamber music, again, usually with a fairly strong wind brass percussion bias, but it can be very varied. So for instance, a few years ago, there was a string of pieces where I wrote a symphony for wind orchestra, followed by a piece for solo trumpet and string quartet, and then a work for choir, brass quintet, narrator, and organ that was kind of a 40-minute piece. And, and then I think a tuba sonata with tuba and piano. So it often is pretty varied. And that's good for the creativity, good for your soul as well, so because if you end up writing for one ensemble a lot, it's kind of sometimes you reach the same problem only a few weeks later, but in a different piece. And so maybe you don't have a different answer to that problem because you've kind of gone through the process of finding the solution to that issue that you're really happy with. So it's not going to be different in the next piece. So changing up the kind of pieces you write, fast and slow, and the different instrumentation is something I pretty carefully try to plan to make sure that always there's a fresh kind of approach to each piece.
Yeah, there's definitely the amount of variation in that is really cool. Even though you have that you have a lot of experience with the wind brass band scene, it's cool to hear that being able to write for other stuff enriches that, and there's that flow back and forth between the two things. Yeah. So obviously you said you've been doing that full time for 15 years, which is, older than some of our audience have been alive. Some of them. But so when was the first time you picked up an instrument?
That's a difficult question to answer because I kind of don't remember a lot of these things, not because they weren't significant moments or anything, but because music was just always around from a very early age. My parents are both amateur folk musicians, and so even when my mum was pregnant with me, I was at folk festivals before I was born into the world. So I was surrounded by music from even before I was born. So music was always around. I guess I probably started playing piano, I want to say around the age of 7 or so. And by playing piano, I mean, we're not talking, really playing, but like tinkering around. And maybe there was a couple of lessons here or there. And so I guess it would have probably been around that age, but it's entirely possible it was before that. And of course, at school, there was recorders, which was a really strong part of music education in the UK at that time. So, I mean, I'd imagine probably from the age of 4, there was music happening because there was music happening in school at that point. But I don't remember specifically when it was.
That's sort of like, that's a problem I think a lot of musicians I talk to have. Some of them are like, know it off by heart because it's like a moment. But a lot of them are like, it was so early, I don't really remember. Or it was just, so it feels like it's just been a constant. I remember my first piano lesson, but that's just because I got to get pulled out of class to do it in school. That was it's a distinct memory. But yeah, it's really cool to hear like your parents as like folk musicians. Did they like, as a composer, does that like background like influence anything you do, or is it just like in a strong way, or is it sort of just like one of the things that like, was around and sort of like help you grow up in music?
I don't think in my music there's any overt reference to folk music. I don't think it's really directly sort of influenced my writing, but for sure, being surrounded by it for so much of my early life, probably up to the age of 16, 17, that probably meant, I mean, like you can't have that much time of your life taking something in without it being part of who you are and as a musician and a person. So for sure that'll be in there. But equally, like I was listening to the Beatles from, as long ago as I can imagine or remember, from when I was a very small child, but also Beethoven and Brahms as well. Like they were always, I spent a lot of time with my grandma. My grandma was a huge Beethoven fan. And so she would play Beethoven while doing the cleaning or whatever. She just loved it. And so I would listen to a lot of different types of music from a very early age. And just by the whole notion that you are a product of your environment, my environment had a broad range of music and musical styles. So I mean, I can't say no, there is no folk music influence, but I think it'd be difficult to find something really direct. I don't use folk song or anything like that.
Yeah. That's cool that you have such a distinct memory of your grandma with Beethoven. That's like
right. And she would do the cleaning, and Beethoven would be on. And I remember once asking her why, and she said because it makes her happy while cleaning.
Oh, that's awesome.
I know, isn't that cool? Like that's like it's just, and she wasn't a musician or anything, but like it just goes to show that sort of, the power of music, and it's not going to be Beethoven for everyone or the Beatles. It could be anyone or anything, but we use music in so many different ways. But I wonder if a little bit in general day-to-day life and in society, we've kind of moved a little bit away from listening to something because we know it makes us, in this case, happy, to just hearing something and consuming it on the way past. I don't know.
Yeah, they were so inundated with music that it's interesting to sort of like think about how we've engaged with music changes as it becomes like such a fabric rather than something that you sort of, because it's everywhere, rather than something you have to like put a CD in or put a record on and play it. Like there's sort of an intention that has to happen there. But now it's because it's everywhere, it's changed the relationship with music for sure. Though I definitely still put stuff on in the car where I'm like, this is just to make this drive enjoyable.
Of course. But I would add this actually, because my grandma's generation, so I'm in my 40s. So, I mean, we're talking pre-Second World War generation, just post the First World War. She was born. She'd have been over 100 now if she was still alive. They didn't have TV.
Yeah.
And so family time did focus around around music, and it was the radio, of course. It wasn't even like records became a thing until a little bit later. And famously, we know even in pop music, songs had to be under 3 minutes to fit on one side of a 78 or a 45 or whatever it was.
Yeah.
They are pieces of vinyl for the kids watching at home, I guess.
Yeah, for the people, vinyl's still around. People underestimate.
It's cool again.
It is. It's very expensive. You had music as such like a big part of your life. So like, what made you go from I love like it's around all the time and it's a huge part of how I like enjoy being and like participating into I'm going to turn this into like the career I'm going to pursue?
Yeah, this is really, in a way, I got lucky because, so the long story short is my family, we didn't have money. There wasn't money. My parents both worked 6 days a week in order to make sure my sister and myself could have music lessons. My sister's a brilliant musician. You kind of don't appreciate that as a kid as much as you do now as an adult, looking at, what sacrifices were made. But music was never really, I don't remember music being the thing that I really wanted to do at any time until I was maybe in my late teens. And even then, maybe even my early 20s, I always wanted to, be a soccer player or kind of, I don't know, astronaut seemed like a pretty cool thing to do for a while. But yeah, I don't think I was ever really set up for either of those things. A lack of footballing talent kind of made sure I couldn't be a soccer player, and I'm probably not quite the right build for an astronaut. So, but music was always there. I always did music, and I was always pretty good at music. And I don't know. I don't think I ever really wanted to admit that to myself. I think I thought I was a bit too cool to admit that music was this thing that I really, truly loved and still I'm in complete love with. And so it was kind of a path of least resistance in some ways that I ended up kind of going in the UK at 16. I left school in my town. That's what happened. It's changed now. And then between 16 and 18, you do another qualification that sort of narrows down things a little bit. And they're the qualification you need to get into university. And music became an even bigger part of my life at that time. I did 2 music courses, A-levels, as they're called, and ended up getting a place at several of the music colleges around the UK, the music schools, the conservatories, and ended up moving to Manchester to go to the Royal Northern College of Music. And you know what? I think there was probably a point. It was a 4-year undergraduate, which is unusual in the UK. It's usually a 3-year undergraduate. There was probably a point in my 3rd year where I realized I loved doing what I was doing, and I kind of needed to make peace with that. And so I ended up in a place where I was able to sort of start, really taking what I did seriously and working out whether this was something I was good enough to do for a career, whether this was something I was committed enough to do as a career, and whether I was able to handle the idea of what being a composer means, because there isn't like a defined career path or set of qualifications that means at the end of it, you're going to get a job. It's not necessarily like something, I don't know, being a lawyer or something like that, where there's a very clear sort of set of criteria and paths. And as long as you kind of fulfill all those, generally you're going to find gainful employment somewhere. It's just not like that for composers. A lot of people go on to maybe get involved in the education side of composing and helping young folks compose, and maybe only write a few pieces themselves every year, or maybe just one piece. Some folks go into teaching in a big way. And by teaching, I mean composition teaching at maybe universities or conservatories. These are not easy positions to get. There's very, very few of them, and there's a lot of composers in the world, as you know, right? So there's the possibility that if you want to try and make it, whatever that may be, as a composer and work full-time as a composer, you're going to have to really work hard at self-promotion to a degree, but actually kind of building the relationships that will last a lifetime, that are friendships, and you get to work with those friends throughout your career. And that's like the thing I love doing most. And so it's, you never know when it's going to end, if it's even going to start. And so it's quite a commitment to do it. And again, I think just like what you want to do in life is a big part of that as well. Like, I don't mean as a composer or musician. I mean, what are your ambitions and hopes? Do you want to be someone that has a regular income, that has a car and, you know, a couple of kids and a couple of dogs, and go on a couple of nice holidays to somewhere sunny each year? Because if you do, maybe like composing is a difficult entry into that lifestyle, because it's probably going to be a fair bit of time before you get to a point where all of that is personally accessible and financially accessible. So there's a lot of decisions to be made, and sometimes it's easier to just not make a decision and just go with it and see how it goes.
That's a really interesting sort of like journey, in the sense that you sort of find yourself in that place and realize, oh, this is the place I want to be, but you still have that moment. And I know, as a person who had a similar sort of like career trajectory thus far, though I'm at a very different stage of it, the beginning stages of it, honestly, that's a thing. That is a real conversation that does happen, and you sort of have to go through it. And it's good to hear that, like, I'm not the only one who has that internal conversation all the time, because it's a big decision and it's hard. And I know there's tons of people who I know who are very creative, and completely validly when I love to do this, but I'm not going to do it for my life, because that doesn't line up with how I want to live life. And I think that's something that's important to recognize, both as a musician and also as a person who like loves music but didn't pursue it, because it's like it's different career, and you have to be wanting to do that, and that doesn't make you less of a person who likes music. You know
exactly. What I mean? Yeah, I have a very high respect for the person who lives above the shop down the road, who works in works in a supermarket or something, or in a store somewhere, and at night is writing their string quartet that they've been writing for the last 3 years, knowing that probably no one's going to play it. But like that person is as pure a composer as you will ever find, right? Because it's absolutely, it's an absolute love of and dedication to their art.
Yeah, not everything you love has to become your job.
Exactly.
Which is a thing that the world today definitely doesn't deal with super well. I find a lot of people try to convert those things, and that's not a bad thing. But sometimes I think there feels pressure to do that, and there shouldn't be that kind of pressure. You know,
I agree, and musicians have an even harder time of that than anyone else as well, because music usually, in fact, always starts as a hobby. And then gradually it becomes something that's a more serious hobby. And then all of a sudden, this thing that you did for fun and for the love and joy of it, and for all the other things that music brings you, you kind of now doing it at university, and there's deadlines, and there's real dedicated practice that needs to happen if you're to take this to the next level. You know, there's all these things, and all of a sudden, then maybe you become, I don't know, a high school band teacher. So now you're teaching, and you're maybe playing in some local ensembles, and you're doing all this kind of thing, and you're earning money, and you're doing all those things, and you can buy the house and the car. But what is it that you're doing for a hobby now? Because we need hobbies. We need that spare time in our lives. We need that thing away from what it is that we do in order to be the best musicians we can be. I know. Like, I reached a point maybe 6 or 7 years ago where I decided, you know, I watch a lot of sports. I'm a big soccer fan, so I watch a lot of UK games. But I just decided I needed to do something myself personally, and so I took up golf, which it turns out I couldn't have taken up anything worse, because it's just the most frustrating sport on earth. But I do love it. But, you know, like, because you need, like, the whole thing about having a hobby is you have that little space in your life that you want filled. And all of a sudden, when music goes from being a hobby to being a profession, we kind of lose a little bit of ourselves that was that hobby space that we still need. And so it's really important to have as broader kind of scope of activities and things that you have an interest in and do as possible, because that is what helps you be the best musician you can be as well.
Yeah, I think that's really important. It's something that, like, as a person who is like sort of more recently and coming into like the beginning stages of like a music career, and also like more recently out of school, and sort of went from school into a pandemic, so not the most ideal time. But there's that transition into going, oh, I have to do things I like. That I think music's cool, education, occasionally, for those maybe interested in applying, forewarning, occasionally makes it feel very hard to take time for yourself and to do things you love that aren't directly related to your like career, kind of thing. So I think taking up golf, or in my case, getting back into reading fantasy novels, is like a really important like thing to do for yourself to create some more work-life balance when your sort of life part of your life becomes your work part of your life.
Yeah, exactly.
Which happens a lot. And if I could go back 6 years to when I was in school, I would tell younger me, hey, so you need to do hobbies
Right.
that aren't playing Skyrim until 1 a.m. Also, if you're interested in applying to universities, check out our application guides currently available at bandology.ca/post-sec-programs. They give nice guides about what the audition requirements are, and sort of help guide you into seeing what the options are if you want to pursue music. In university and the college guides going up the next week, which are just as thorough. I know, I wrote them. That decision obviously doesn't come like in a vacuum, though. Like that sort of like journey doesn't happen without sort of people around to like influence you and like guide you. So do you have any like, maybe we can split this up. Do you have any like mentors you remember distinctly that really helped you along that sort of like getting into your career path or during sort of like your career, as well as a little bit about like your composing influences, maybe musically or otherwise?
There's been all kinds of people along the way. I think anyone who becomes a musician, in any way, shape, or form, like it doesn't matter whether you're just starting out in band class, or if you are playing in a symphony orchestra, or teaching at a high school or university, or playing in a community ensemble. It doesn't matter. Whatever, everyone's got people that have helped them, that stand out. And of course, the longer you've done this, probably the more people there are along the way. I guess there was probably, maybe I'd say, 3 really important people through education. The first one was Lynn Pemberton, who was my high school music teacher, who she kind of realized that I was doing a lot of composing. I think up till that stage, my parents thought I was just trying to get out of practicing, but I was composing, and I think she realized that and sort of helped everyone kind of understand that this was a legitimate thing that I was doing, and probably should be encouraged a bit. So that was at high school, but like I said, I left high school at 16. But then between 16 and 18, I went to a college where I met Judy Norden, who was my piano teacher, but she was also the head of that particular music center. And she, I think, probably enjoyed my slightly, let's go with cheeky side. Like she kind of found me kind of interesting and fun, I guess, and understood that I was probably a little bit different. I didn't cope with things in the same way as other people, and kind of my mind worked in a slightly different way. And she took me, you know, in, and her husband, who conducted the band at the college, who played my music when I was, you know, 16, 17. That meant a lot and was a huge part of my development, of course. You know, they just, everything I could ever need was always there. And whenever I was doing something stupid, you know, it was an arm around the shoulder and just a little helping hand, and like they both still mean the world to me. And you know, I wouldn't be doing what I do without having had them in my life, for sure. And then the third person I would say in education is Peter Graham, who was my teacher at master's and doctorate level. And we kind of knew each other before I'd done my undergraduate. The University of Salford, where I did my postgraduate degrees, is also in Manchester. Manchester and Salford are basically the same city. It's kind of like Minneapolis, St. Paul. You know, it's the same sort of thing. It's the same area. It's just there's a boundary. And so we knew each other. And I actually was teaching at the University of Salford because they needed someone to help cover some of the classes. And that meant I could do my master's with him, and he, you know, for a reduced fee, which is always nice. What he saw in me when we started working together, and when he was my teacher, that's what I should really say. I think what he recognized that in me was probably that the talent was there, you know, the ability and the skills were there, but I didn't have any confidence. None. I had no confidence whatsoever. And that was having come out of a conservatory system where it's a pretty competitive environment. And my teacher there was not the most helpful of persons to sort of, you know, allow people to expand in their own kind of musical way. And so Peter instilled in me like this sense of confidence. And the other thing that he did that was significant is he helped me set up my own publishing company, which meant that I was able to retain all the rights to my own music, which has been a big part of my career. So without Peter, I also wouldn't be doing what I do. And so I guess those people along the way, and there's been many more since, because once you become older, you've met many more people, and there's a lot of people who I'm truly grateful for, whether they've given me a chance when they didn't have to, or whether they've reached out when, you know, we didn't know each other, or whatever it may be. There's always kind of people that really help you and take you along on their journey, and they become part of your journey. And so there's always those people. But Peter, Judy, and Jim, and Lynn are probably the people I would say that without them, I wouldn't be here doing what I'm doing. The second part of your question was about musical influences.
Yeah.
So this is always one that like has a really couple of easy answers and then a sort of bigger answer that I've already sort of alluded to. For me, like Stravinsky is everything. Like I just, like whatever I ever think of doing, Stravinsky's done it 100 years ago and 1,000 times better, you know, and you think you had a good idea. And no, he's miles ahead. Like the Rite of Spring score is like a Bible for composers. It's just incredible. It's so him, Messiaen, has always been a big influence. And I'm not sure you always hear their musical styles in my music, but certainly the way of thinking and the way of approaching music. Like Messiaen would often use 16th equals whatever as a tempo, because he was very strict on time and the timing of everything. And I think there's a lot of that in my music that came from Messiaen. But outside of classical music, of course, Beethoven I mentioned earlier. But outside of that, I guess, you know, the Beatles were huge, Pink Floyd, Miles Davis. I mean, a kind of blue, Witch's Brew, Bitch's Brew. There you go. I got all my letters mixed up. Bitch's Brew. Like these are seminal works of art from the 20th century that I was lucky to spend, or have been lucky to so far spend so much of my life surrounded by. And as I said earlier, you can't hear all this music and more specifically listen to all of this music and not be influenced by it in some way or, or form. So I think they're probably my strongest influences. And of course, there's always day-to-day things. You'll hear something or read something, because it's not just musical. I actually really like Shakespeare and often find a lot of, pardon me, I'll try that again. I really like Shakespeare, and you can often find a lot of inspiration through his words. I love like imagery in words, and all those kinds of things, and sounds that are outside of organized music. All those kinds of things just make me think different, and that's like a really healthy thing. And the other thing that's pretty cool is teaching. If I ever have students, teaching students, I find to be such an inspiration, because it's a two-way street. Because when you're challenging a student to sort of come up with a creative way of solving a particular problem or roadblock that they've run into in a piece, well, you're challenging yourself as well. And kind of they come to an answer, and I come to maybe an answer. And now we have like a nice kind of fun sparring session, to sort of work out how you got there and how I got there. And it really helps refine your own thought processes. So yeah, teaching composition is, for me, like an essential part of being a composer.
Yeah, no, the thing you said about teaching being an important part of like your sort of composing resonates a lot. I had a teacher in university who taught me. He was my clarinet instructor, Peter Shackleton, very talented guy. Missed taking lessons with him. But he said, one of the things he said to me throughout, I don't know if it was more than once, but it resonated a lot, was like, teaching keeps me honest, was sort of his phrase. And that's something that stuck with me as I sort of like moved into having to do some teaching, like as part of like my career outside of Bandology, and is something that I've found to be very, very true. There's sort of that, like, if I'm trying to explain it to you, it means suddenly I have to actually do that level of critical thinking to understand myself. And it's a really vital part of growing. And again, if you are, interested in pursuing music, get into teaching quickly. There's an aspect of imposter syndrome that I think comes up. It came up in my undergrad of like, oh, well, I'm not that good. But when you're teaching a 12-year-old, you're probably a little bit better than a 12-year-old when you're sort of approaching that. And even if you're just doing it like as a community thing and a volunteer basis, it's very it's really cool and very enriching, and I think makes you a better musician. So what for you is like a career highlight, or a couple career highlights that like jut out to you as like, oh man, that was awesome, or wow, I'm really proud of that?
Well, firstly, I'll give you a cop-out answer, which is that like finishing any piece, any piece is just like, to me, it always feels like a miracle, because there's always a point when writing a piece where you are full of just self-loathing, self-doubt, realizing that you should have done something else for a career, and what are you thinking doing this thing? You're not good enough, you're an imposter, people are going to find you out, is this the piece? And I know this all sounds like a lot, but every composer goes through that every piece, or every composer goes through that many times in lots of pieces. And so I always find finishing a piece like just a really career highlight, because it means you're still going and you're still doing this thing. There's been a few performances that have meant a great deal to me. And there's been a few collaborations that have. Probably the one that's meant the most to me is my friend Ryan Anthony, who was principal trumpeter of Dallas Symphony for many years, and I played in Canadian brass for many years. And sadly, just over a year ago, lost an 8-year battle with multiple myeloma cancer. But we had an incredible friendship that came about because of music, and we'd have been friends if we'd have met each other in whatever sphere we were both in. But a lot of our friendship was making music together, and the whole sort of 10 years or so that we were friends, all the things I got to do with him were just always the most incredible experiences musically, personally, in every single way. And there were so many highlights with him. There was a peace of mind that he heard when it was kind of it was in a different form, and he heard it, and he says, I need this to be called Song of Hope and be my peace, my anthem to help me get through the cancer. And he performed that in many different places at many different times. And it was always such an incredible, moving and an emotional experience. And that, we would both, and I still do, and, get emails from people saying how the pieces affected them. And it's not about cancer. It's like he always used to say, music equals hope. He has a record label, and it was called Music Equal Hope Records, and that's the way he thought. And we both thought in a very similar way, I think, about music, in that, okay, he was a trumpet player, I was a composer, but ultimately it was our shared beliefs and values in music, and I guess the world, that we were able to spread the gospel of, be almost evangelical about, through either playing the trumpet or being a composer. The goal wasn't to be the best trumpet player or be the best composer. It was to be someone that shared the power of music through what we do. And so there was that. Lots of times with him, the recording, I wrote him a concerto. He commissioned a concerto that he recorded with Dallas Symphony Orchestra, and with Jerry Junkin conducting, Erica Brenner put the whole edit together, and she's a Grammy winner, and like the whole team actually was all Grammy winners. So it was just an incredible set of people to be around. And to have a musical experience with, and he just sounds golden. And you listen to that recording, and actually all the way through the recording session, he was getting phone calls and texts saying, you've got to come to the hospital. Your numbers have gone particularly bad. We need to get on top of this right away. So we weren't able to go out after the recording session. Well, we did. We went for a quick drink, and he had to go. And that was the start of the last couple of years of his life, which had a lot of medical and treatment-based challenges that would sort of be a huge part of his existence. So that was, but there's just been so many amazing moments, and none are more important than the others, and none are more special than the others. Like, I enjoy working with a junior high group and talking about music and what we can do in the world with music. I enjoy that as much as I enjoy a symphony orchestra playing my music that sounds just incredible. I mean, it's like everything to me is just something to be grateful for. So, this is a bit of a cop-out answer, but it's true. Like the whole existence, the whole doing what I do is just a highlight. I get to do these things and have moments that will just never be taken away from you. And so like I say, it's a very privileged and fortunate and lucky career that I have.
That's an answer that sort of takes a little bit of my ability to speak away, and I can talk a lot. But yeah, that's a beautiful answer. Thank you for sharing that. You've talked about now sort of the wonderful moments, and you've also talked about sort of the challenges a little bit of the career that you sort of set out to do, and how it can be complicated, but also has obviously such potential for sort of momentous and sort of beautiful things. Do you have any advice to people who are sort of looking at that as an option, young musicians specifically, sort of going, maybe I want to do this? They sort of have that sort of inclination, that sort of knack to make stuff up and kind of want to see where it goes.
Yeah, just keep doing it. Because here's the thing. So in a way, I think maybe I'm an example of what happens when someone follows the path of least resistance. I ended up being a composer just because I kind of did it at school, and then I sort of ended up going to college to do it for my degree. And then, some people were playing my music, so I did it a bit more. And then I did a master's, and then I did a doctorate. And by the other side of the doctorate, I was already getting paid to write music. And so these were all commissioned works. And that starts with someone says, "Oh, can we commission you to write a piece?" And you're like, "Sure." And you're working out, how can I do my day job, which at the time was working at Ticketmaster in a call center for me. How can I do that whilst writing this 14-minute piece of music for a brass band? You know, how can I do that? Well, hang on a minute. That's enough to pay my rent for a month and pay my food, and maybe 2 months if I'm smart about this. So maybe I could take 2 months off work. Well, you can't take 2 months off work, because then you got to get a job at the other side of it. So, you know, then you get lucky, because like towards the end of that piece, maybe someone will say, "Hey, can you write us a piece?" And it's just a small amount of money, but it's like, oh, well, maybe I can pay my rent again this month. And then after a while, like, you know, 2 or 3 pieces down the line, what you're going to be doing, or maybe a year or 2 down the line, where everything fits in, and you know, and finances are a consideration, because you still have to pay the rent and stuff. So I fell into that, and I got lucky. It wasn't through astute planning or careful consideration. It was just stumbled into it, you know. It could have easily gone the other way. What I would say is that if you love composing, or if you love performing, if you love music, whatever it is, just keep doing it. Like, you don't have to do it as a profession to love it. And in fact, I really admire someone who's maybe a nurse, or someone who works in a supermarket, or who's a lawyer, or who does whatever, sells cars, it doesn't matter, who does all those things. And they do that because, you know, on a Wednesday night, they get to go to the band rehearsal. And they go and play euphonium or flute or trumpet or whatever, or clarinet. And that's the thing they look forward to most in the week. Like, the reason they go and do some of those jobs is partly for a passion for the work that they do, but partly because it means that they can have the life they want. And part of that life, and part of that full, rich experience of living here on this earth to them, is playing music with people. Or alone, I mean, it doesn't matter. But going and being part of that creative and joyous and collaborative experience. And I'm often in so much admiration for those people, because sometimes doing music day in, day out, you have to really focus on the reasons you do it. You can't just presume that you loved it as a 12-year-old kid and are going to just love it for every day for the rest of your life, because no relationship exists like that in the world. Just because you love something once, it doesn't mean so you're going to love it forever, or that the love gets stronger or more wide-ranging or anything like that. In fact, we know quite the opposite. We know that love can die as well. And so those people who had that love for it and still go to band or to jazz orchestra or to choir on a Wednesday or Thursday night or something, like, those people they're the people that I just love. And you know, you don't have to do it as a career to be fulfilled by it as a human soul, but also to be good at it. You don't have to do it as a career. So I guess you asked for a piece of advice, I don't know, around 3 years ago. And so eventually I've got to it now. It would be just to keep going and keep doing what you're doing, keep loving what you're doing, keep working hard if that's what you enjoy. No, keep working hard, practice hard. That's the thing. So I shouldn't give bad advice. Definitely work hard. And just keep doing it. And there's no pressure. You know what? If you end up going and doing, let's say you decide to go to university and you go and do an English literature degree, there's nothing stopping you playing in the university orchestra or concert band or singing in the choir or just forming a rock band. You know, like, I mean, no great rock band in the history of the world has come from a music program, you know. No, the Beatles and the Stones weren't at, you know, studying at Cambridge University, doing an arts history degree, you know. They got together in each other's garages because they enjoyed making music together. So, like, just keep doing it and keep loving it and keep looking for more ways to keep loving it and keep doing it, you know. And share that joy. Like, talk about why you love it. You know, like, it's so refreshing and it feels so good to talk about why you love music. And I think if we do that more, I think the world gets a little bit better, because I think for so many of us, like our reasons for music and our love of music are always different. Everyone's different. But I think at the heart of a lot of the reason so many of us love music, and whether this is a conscious thing or not, is that I truly, personally believe that through music we find so much joy and hope and beauty and empathy and compassion and love and joy. I don't know, I'm saying all these words, but they're all true. These are things that music gives us in a way that nothing else does in life. And it's such a tangible, meaningful way. Music is like a powerful force that's like unlike anything else on this planet. And if we take all those things, the beauty and the joy and the empathy and compassion and all those kinds of things, if we think about those things, they're things that feel to me right now that we're not seeing enough of in this world. We're just not. And it's making the world a worse place. So I think that if you can find any agreement with me with just some of those things, that empathy and love and beauty, joy, compassion, hope, healing is going to be a big one as we move forward out of this pandemic. If we can find just one or two of those things ourselves in it, then you know what? Maybe more music is going to make the world a better place. You know, and for me, that's the power of music, that it can be, and to me is the one force above anything else on this planet that can change the world in this universal language. And we all experience and listen and hear and see and feel music differently. But there's no one on earth who really doesn't experience music one way or the other, whether it's singing to yourself, whether it's whistling, whether it's going to concerts, whether it's performing, whether it's watching TV, listening to the radio, whether it's whatever. Music is everywhere, and there's a reason for that. And we need to harness that power even more and really talk about why we're harnessing that power and really do it through music itself, like demonstrate that power. And if we do that, I think the world can be better. I think the world can be better. I truly believe that. And that is why I do music. And the answer I gave earlier about memorable moments when I talked about Ryan, that was kind of his thing as well, that music equaled hope. Like, that was a guy who was given 6 months to live and lasted 8 years, who gave us being the world, this incredible existence as a human being for an extra 7.5 years than he was supposed to have. And he put that down to, of course, the love of his family, a brilliant, brilliant doctor and set of medical experts, but that music was just everything. Music equaled hope for him always. And like, I saw that guy kind of in a terrible state walking into a room, like he'd had a bad day on the chemo and the hair wasn't great and he looked gone. And, you know, maybe sometimes he had a cane because he had issues that were secondary issues. And he'd sit on his stool and he'd pick up the trumpet, and all of a sudden it's like this gigantic human soul that fills the room, and like he's smiling and he's a different person. So music changes the world. Music is hope. And so I think whatever it is that you do in music, just keep doing it. That would be my piece of advice, I guess.
It's a good piece of advice. And I think a really apt conception of like the power of what music can do. One of the things that like I think about a lot is music's capacity to like instigate change, as sort of like, and also how it can impact people. So the things you were speaking to very much resonate with sort of like how I feel about like what music has the potential to do, and to a certain extent why I think, you know, maybe music education is important. I don't know if that's something. Why do you think music education is important? But I know for me, part of it's like if we give people the chance to experience this, they build a lot of skills, but they also get this chance to be part of an art form that has such a capacity to impact people, and that's sort of really important. But
yeah, I mean, music education isn't treated as important by any governments that I ever see. You know, it's always the first to be cut, and yet it's the thing that teaches us the most in the most tangible way. It's pretty simple, like, you know, the chance for expression and creativity that comes through music, the ability to communicate something in a way that there's no way you can do with words or actions. Like it's part of forming us as a society. Like music forms us as a society. And so all those things I've just talked about that make the world, of all things that can make the world better, it's no coincidence that after 40 years or whatever it is of music cuts and arts education cuts, that we're seeing a lack of all the things that arts education and specifically music education teaches us, or we find through music education. And so the power of music is something that changes the world, and it's as simple as that. And sometimes we get bogged down saying, oh, I like music because of this, or I think we should have music because of this. No, just make it simple. The power of music changes the world. And every time I see a poster in a classroom that says 10 reasons to do band, and like number 3 is it helps coordination, which is good for sports, and number 7, I don't know what they are, but, you know, like it helps with mathematics, you know, it helps with counting, so your kid will be better at maths or something. I'm like, you know, if you want to give that to the parents and say, hey, here's the reason your kid should do music, cool. But as musicians, we're letting ourselves down if we're saying to the kids, they're the reasons you're doing it. No, we're talking about the power of music. It's just that simple.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of those posters in my life, and I've had to, and like you have those conversations and you talk about them, especially as a person who goes into it, because you're like, I need to know why there becomes a level of, and I know especially in the last year, at least in Ontario, there's been an aspect of trying to justify your own existence that is always sort of on the edge of musicians, but also music educators, especially. Yeah. And I think it's important because it also does have those benefits, and those are great benefits for people. And I don't want to like say they are less important, but there is that aspect of it kind of feels like you're letting yourself down because it's so much more than the sum of its like benefits. Yeah. I think that's a very strong statement. And I agree in a lot of ways. We're going to pivot completely now and into sort of our Fast Five, which is like short questions. They're not all to do with music, a little bit get to know you, a little bit sort of palate cleanser to, you know, quick rapid fire stuff to close out the interview. So you ready for some rapid fire questions?
Hit me.
Question 1. Favorite movie soundtrack?
Star Wars.
Classic. Absolute classic. John Williams. Amazing. Your favorite concert you attended?
Oh, this is supposed to be quick. Paul McCartney, October 2019, I think it was, here in Winnipeg.
Oh, somebody else answered Paul McCartney in another interview.
It was incredible.
I believe it. He's such an amazing entertainer.
Yes.
And creative mind and musician. That show's got to be so fun.
And the cool thing, I know this is quick, but the cool thing was I was with a friend, and we leave to go and get a drink, and we come back in, and they've got, you know, the big screens on the side, and there's this horn section on the big screens, and that's Kenji. And my mate says, well, who's Kenji? I said, Kenji, like we were really close mates at college. And like, it turns out that his saxophone player was a guy we were really close friends with. I was close friends with 20 years ago at college. Wow. So I text him, and he's texting me from on stage with, playing with Paul McCartney. And so we went out afterwards and caught up and had a great time. Music's a small, small world, and you go in lots of different directions, but it always brings you back together.
Yeah. Very rarely do I drop a name in a conversation. Like, it's always a 50-50 chance as to whether there's never less than a 50% chance that the person I'm talking to knows another person I know.
Yeah.
It's very eerie, especially when I start talking to people in the area where it's like, do you know this person? Yeah, no, I went to school with them. Oh, okay. And then you find out things you didn't know before, and you get this wonderful music gossip chain. It's great.
Exactly. Yeah.
So do you have a hidden talent, and what is it? Like, something not necessarily music related, but like hidden talent. The answer can also be no. I use my hidden talents for my career, which is.
You know what? No, I'm not. I'm not talented at other things. I'm an okay squash player, and my golf game's improved by about 20 shots in the last 5 years. But I'm not talented at either of those. But no, I don't think so. I don't think there's something I do that people go, oh wow, Pete also does that.
Yeah, no, I have trouble answering that question, because I'm like, I kind of do all of the things that I was good at that were like unique for my job. What's the last show you binge watched? Question forward.
Last show. This is I'm only pausing because I can't remember. Like, I've been watched a lot of shows in the last 18 months, as we all have. You know what? I'm actually binge watching right now a British show called Allo Allo, which is a wartime comedy that was made in the 80s. And I remember it as a kid, and it's very, very, very funny still. And it's aged well. There's none of the things that tend to end up with something getting cancelled. So yeah, Allo Allo, a British sitcom from the mid 80s.
Yeah, no, they're like in France. And
that's right. He's a French cafe owner.
Yeah, and he's like sort of associated with the French resistance against the.
That's right, and also the German generals, and also.
Yeah, he's got that. It was used to be on a channel in Ontario called Vision TV. On a regular basis, they have my family is British, so they watch a bunch of British sitcoms, and that was a place.
It's so funny.
It's so funny. It's so strange and like it's very British in a lot of ways, and it's very cool. And the last question, you live obviously in Winnipeg, and you've obviously also lived in the UK, or you wouldn't have that accent. So if you could live anywhere that isn't those two places, where would it be? Or a different place in Canada or the UK kind of thing?
You know what? I've been to lots of places, and there's so many different things that draw you to a place. I'd love to move to Kansas City at some point. I've got so many great friends down there, and it's such a cool city, like just such a cool city. But probably of all the places I've been, if I could move to one place, maybe Sydney.
Yeah.
Sydney is just the most incredible city.
It's on my list of places I would like to go post.
Yeah.
Safety.
Yeah. So cool.
Yeah. I've never been that far south. So that's the Fast Five. But before we go, do you have any exciting plans, projects that you've either sort of like done over the course of the pandemic, or that are sort of like coming up?
About a month ago, I finished a new work for soprano and chamber winds that was commissioned by Jackie Dawson, who's the director of bands here at the University of Manitoba. And that was commissioned by the University of Manitoba, and then a whole load of other universities across North America, including the University of Toronto, Kansas University, KU, University of Kansas. They were a big contributor to it. Jackie's doing her doctorate there, so it's kind of a joint commission between those with some other smaller partners. And so the premiere of that happens on October 5, I think it is. And so the plan is to be down there for that, and fingers crossed, that that this pandemic does what we need it to do, and I can be there and all the rest of it. And that would be the first time I would have heard a piece of mine performed in person since late February 2019. And so I've written quite a bit of music between then and now, but haven't got to hear any of it. So I guess that'll be the first acid test of whether over those 18 months I've got better or whether I suck more. I don't know. Like we're gonna find out.
Well, I'm sure it's only improved.
Well, and I'm glad that you think that you know what it's like to be a composer. You just never know until you know. Like it feels like I'm really happy with the job, and I wrote my own texts for it as well. So that kind of is even more nerve-wracking because I kind of get over the whole nerve-wracking thing about writing a piece of music because you kind of put yourself out there, make yourself quite vulnerable. But you get to a stage where you're quite comfortable with that feeling because it happens all the time. But when you write your own words, like I feel like a 14-year-old boy who doesn't know how to kind of like tell someone they love them anymore. Like it's just a really weird feeling going back and doing something that you're not sort of necessarily like isn't part of your day-to-day life, but it's going to be part of your day-to-day life within this piece of music. So it's kind of exciting to go and hear that, and I can't wait for that.
That's awesome. That's very exciting. I hope it goes well.
I'm sure it will.
Because that sounds very cool. Soprano and chamber winds. That's a cool combo.
Yeah,
it's got me thinking. So thank you again so much for coming on and chatting with me. It was so nice to see you again, and it was a wonderful conversation. It was super enlightening. I'm so glad you shared so much of like your experiences with us, and gave a lot of good advice to people, and talked a little bit about the realities of those experiences, because I think hearing that from someone is very important for young people, and myself as a sort of older young person. Old young, I don't know. I feel old every time I like interact.
I'm gonna go with young, but like I've got a contextual thing here.
Yeah, I feel old a lot, which is terrifying. But yes, thank you so much for talking to us. For those listening, again, I'm Sandy Wright. This has been a Bandology interview. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great evening.
Thanks for joining us. If you like what you heard, you can learn more about our organization at bandology.ca, which features information about music education, advocacy and research, and our Play a Gig and Bandcamp programs. Follow us on social media for more videos, performance, and interviews on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube.